In 1941, German pilots called it the heart of the butcher bird. The BMW 801 Radial engine powered the Luftwaffe's deadliest fighter, but it was dying from the inside out. What dark secret nearly destroyed Germany's most crucial wartime engine? As the Wehrmacht swept across Europe, Germany's air superiority faced a critical challenge. The Luftwaffe's existing fighters were being outmatched by newer Allied designs, and the Reich needed a revolutionary power plant to maintain dominance. BMW's answer was audacious: a complex radial engine that would either secure German air supremacy or become their greatest engineering disaster. From the drawing boards of Munich to the skies over the Eastern Front, the BMW 801 would become both salvation and curse for the Third Reich's ambitions. The year 1939 had seen the Messerschmitt Bf 109 reign supreme, but by 1940, British Spitfires and Hurricanes were catching up fast. The Luftwaffe High Command knew they needed something revolutionary, not just an improvement, but a leap forward. Enter Kurt Tank's radical FW 190 design, which demanded an engine unlike anything Germany had produced. The air-cooled radial concept flew in the face of conventional German wisdom that favored liquid-cooled inline engines. But BMW had a vision, an engine so advanced, so powerful, that would render Allied fighters obsolete overnight. They couldn't have imagined how close they would come to both triumph and catastrophe. The BMW 801 was engineering arrogance made manifest, a 14-cylinder twin-row radial beast displacing 41.8 liters and churning out 1,700 horsepower. This air-cooled monster wasn't just an engine, it was a statement of German industrial might. When BMW engineers first fired it up, the ground trembled. Strapped to the nose of the Focke-Wulf Fw 190, it transformed a radial fighter design into the Würger, the Shrike, a bird of prey that struck terror into Allied bomber crews. With its revolutionary Kommandogerät control system managing fuel mixture, propeller pitch, and boost pressure automatically, the 801 was decades ahead of its time. This wasn't just horsepower. It was raw, mechanized fury wrapped in cooling fins and forged aluminum. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Each cylinder displaced nearly 3 liters. Imagine 14 motorcycle engines arranged in a circle, firing in perfect sequence. Engine weighed 1,012 kilograms dry, a massive chunk of precision machined metal that somehow had to be cooled by nothing more than the slipstream. The BMW 801's bore was 156 millimeter with a stroke of 156 millimeter. A perfect square design that allowed it to rev higher than typical radials. Its compression ratio of 7.22 to 1 was pushed to the limits of available fuel technology. The 2-speed supercharger could cram air into those cylinders at pressures that would have destroyed lesser engines. At full power, the 801 consumed fuel at a staggering rate, over 400 liters per hour. 58-liter oil tank circulated vital lubricant through bearings that spun at speeds that defied comprehension. Every component was engineered to tolerances measured in thousandths of a milliliter. It had to survive the violence of combat flying. But BMW's masterpiece was born in chaos. Early prototypes literally melted themselves to death. Cylinder head temperatures soared past 300 degrees Celsius, pistons seized, and test engines destroyed themselves in spectacular fashion. The Reichsluftfahrtministerium nearly canceled the entire program 3 times. Engineers worked 18-hour shifts, racing against time as the war machine demanded results. The cooling problem seemed insurmountable. How could an air-cooled engine survive the heat of its own power? Test pilot after test pilot reported the same terrifying issue: engines catching fire mid-flight. BMW's reputation hung by a thread as competitors whispered of the Bavarian furnace. Project director Dr. Hermann Ostrich faced mounting pressure from both Berlin and his own design team, some of whom secretly believed the 801 would never work. The first prototype, the BMW 801 V1, took to the skies in April 1940 and promptly caught fire. Test pilot Flugkapitän Hans Sanders barely managed to land the burning aircraft. The second prototype suffered catastrophic bearing failure just after 12 hours. BMW's engineers discovered that traditional radial engine cooling theory simply didn't apply at these power levels. They needed to reinvent the science of air cooling itself. Working around the clock in BMW's Munich facilities, they developed revolutionary cooling fin designs, experimenting with different alloys and fin spacing. They created new cowling designs that directed airflow with scientific precision. The Kommandogerät system alone required 40,000 man-hours to develop, a mechanical computer that managed engine parameters better than any pilot could. Dr. Ostrich later wrote in his memoirs, "We were asking metal to do the impossible. Every morning I expected to find my resignation letter already written on my desk." The pressure intensified when Hermann Göring himself visited the facility. demanding to know why BMW was failing while Daimler-Benz succeeded with their inline engines. The development team knew they were one failure away from seeing their entire program handed over to competitors. In desperation, they began recruiting engineers from Switzerland and occupied territories, anyone who might have fresh ideas about cooling and metallurgy. If you're into stories of innovation under fire, subscribe now. We've got more legends to uncover. Then came the moment that changed everything. On a cold morning in September 1941, Oberleutnant Otto Kittel pushed his FW-190's throttle forward, and the BMW 801 responded with a roar that shook the airfield. What followed stunned both German and British pilots. The 190 climbed like a homesick angel, rolled faster than anything in the sky, and dove with the confidence of absolute power. When RAF pilots first encountered the FW-190 over France, they radioed back reports that seemed impossible. A German fighter that could outrun, outclimb, and outfight their beloved Spitfire VS. The BMW 801 had given birth to a killer. In the hands of aces like Josef Pips Priller and Adolf Galland, the engine's raw power translated into aerial supremacy. For a brief, glorious moment, the BMW 801 owned the skies over Europe. The first combat encounter became legend within days. Squadron leader John Webster of 129 Squadron RAF recalled, "We bounced what we thought were 109s near Lille. Suddenly they rolled and climbed in ways that made my Spitfire feel like flying a brick. My wingman simply disappeared. One moment he was there, the next, flames and smoke. These new fighters moved like nothing we'd seen." The FW-190's BMW 801 gave it a climb rate of 3,300 feet per minute and a top speed of 426 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, and roll rates that made Spitfire pilots dizzy just watching. But it wasn't just raw performance. The Kommandogerät system meant German pilots could focus entirely on combat while the engine managed itself. British pilots meanwhile juggled throttle, mixture, and propeller controls while trying to stay alive. Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland tested the FW-190 and immediately declared, "It's like switching from a tired old cart horse to a thoroughbred stallion. The 801 doesn't just give you power, it gives you confidence." Christmas 1941, the RAF had lost 259 fighters to FW-190s while claiming only 78 in return. The BMW 801 had shifted the balance of air power. Allied commanders scrambled for answers to the Focke-Wulf problem. But behind the triumphs lay a secret that could have ended the war differently. Deep within BMW's factories, forced laborers and resistance members had discovered the engine's fatal weakness, and they exploited it. Saboteurs deliberately mismatched critical components, creating microscopic flaws that would fail at altitude. They contaminated oil supplies, miscalibrated fuel injection nozzles, and even altered blueprints. The most devastating blow came from within BMW itself. A group of engineers sympathetic to the resistance subtly modified the engine's altitude performance calculations, ensuring the 801 would lose power above 20,000 feet. While German pilots blamed the thin air, the truth was far more sinister. The very people building these engines were slowly strangling the Luftwaffe's lifeline. Internal Gestapo reports, discovered after the war, revealed that up to 15% of BMW 801 engines may have been compromised by sabotage. The sabotage network was more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Led by a French engineer known only as Marianne, workers developed ingenious methods of resistance. They would mis-torque connecting rod bolts by precisely calculated amounts, enough to cause failure after exactly 20 to 25 flight hours, making it appear like normal wear. They mixed microscopic metal filings into oil supplies that would gradually score cylinder walls. Most brilliantly, they altered the Kommandogerät's cam profiles by fractions of a millimeter, causing the system to run engines slightly lean at altitude. Hot enough to damage, not hot enough to show on gauges. A Polish forced laborer named Stanislaw Kowalski later testified, "We knew every weak point because we built them. The Germans thought they were so clever with their quality control, but we were cleverer. Every engine that failed meant Allied boys lived another day." The saboteurs even developed a marking system, tiny scratches on engine cases that told resistance members which engines had been compromised. BMW security tried everything. Random inspections, Gestapo infiltrators, even executing suspected saboteurs. But the resistance network adapted, evolved, and continued their secret war. Post-war analysis suggests their efforts may have reduced the FW-190's effective combat ceiling by 5,000 feet, enough to give Allied bombers a crucial advantage. The moment of truth came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate last gamble on New Year's Day 1945. As hundreds of FW-190s roared toward Allied airfields, their BMW 801 engines pushed beyond all limits. Some pilots reported their engines glowing cherry red, temperature gauges pinned in the danger zone. But they pressed on. Feldwebel Eric Baum later recalled, "My 801 was screaming like a wounded animal, but it gave me everything. Needed just 10 more minutes of power. Those 10 minutes changed history. Despite the sabotage, despite the altitude limitations, despite every odd stacked against them, the BMW 801 engines delivered one final furious performance. They couldn't win the war, but they proved that even a flawed giant could still shake the earth." When Allied intelligence examined captured FW-190s, they found engines that should have failed hours ago, held together by nothing more than German engineering, stubbornness, and pilot desperation. The operation began at 0745 hours with 1,035 German fighters launching in radio silence. Among them, 439 were FW-190s powered by BMW 801s, many approaching their maintenance limits, running on synthetic fuel that burned dirty, maintained by exhausted ground crews with dwindling spare parts. Unterofficer Wilhelm Jonen's engine began misfiring over Eindhoven. I could feel her dying, cylinder by cylinder. The temperature gauge read 340 degrees. Impossible. But I pushed the throttle forward and she gave me one last burst. His 190 destroyed 2 B-17s on the ground before the engine seized completely. Across the battlefield, similar dramas played out. BMW 801s that intelligence predicted would fail at 20,000 feet somehow clawed their way to 25,000. Engines marked by saboteurs delivered power when it mattered most. Major Heinz Baer, leading JG-77, reported, "My maintenance chief told me my engine had maybe 5 hours left. I flew it for 8 that day. When we landed, oil was pouring from every seal. The cowling was burned black, but by God, it brought me home." The Allies lost 479 aircraft destroyed and 184 damaged, their worst single-day loss of the war. But it was Pyrrhic victory. Of the 439 FW-190s that launched, only 271 returned. Many landed with engines so damaged they never flew again. The BMW 801 had given its last full measure, trading its mechanical life for one final moment of glory. By war's end, BMW had produced over 61,000 Type 801 engines, each one a testament to both brilliance and tragedy. The 801 powered not just the FW-190 but also the Do-217 Night Fighter and the Ju-88 variants. Its influence reached far beyond Germany. French engineers studied its design for the Snecma 14R, and Soviet designers incorporated its innovations into their own radials. Today, only a handful of BMW 801s survive in museums and private collections. When one of these rare engines coughs to life in an air show, the sound is unmistakable, a deep, guttural growl that builds to a thunderous roar. Veterans stop mid-conversation. Children cover their ears. It's a sound that carries the weight of history, an innovation born from desperation, of excellence shadowed by darkness. The BMW 801 remains one of aviation's most complex legacies, an engine that simultaneously represented the pinnacle of German engineering and the moral compromises of a regime that would use any means to achieve victory. The numbers tell only part of the story. BMW's factories, using over 140,000 workers, many of them forced laborers, produced engines at a rate that peaked at 1,800 units per month in 1944. Each engine contained 11,000 individual parts, requiring 1,247 manufacturing operations, and consumed 3 tons of raw materials. The total program cost exceeded 2.1 billion Reichsmarks, resources that could have built 50,000 homes or fed a city for years. Yet the BMW 801's technical innovations lived on. Its pressure cooling system influenced jet engine design. The Kommandogerät concept evolved into modern FADEC systems. Even the failure modes discovered through sabotage advanced the science of reliability engineering. In 1972, former BMW engineer Dr. George Meyer, then 78, stood before a restored BMW 801 at the Deutsches Museum. With tears in his eyes, he placed a weathered hand on the cooling fins and whispered, "We built a marvel and a monster. Every time I hear one run, I remember both the boys who flew them and the slaves who built them. That sound, its brilliance and tragedy all at once." Today, only 11 complete BMW 801s exist worldwide. The Flugwerk Schleichheim displays one in cutaway form, revealing the mechanical complexity that made both its success and sabotage possible. When museum guides explain the altitude limitations, few visitors realize they're describing the success of desperate people who fought the war with the only weapons they had: wrenches, files, and courage. The BMW 801 teaches us that even the mightiest machines are vulnerable to the human spirit. There was an engine that could have dominated the skies, brought low not by enemy fighters, but by the brave souls who risked everything to resist tyranny from within. Its story reminds us that technology is never neutral. It It carries the intentions of those who build it and the courage of those who dare to resist its misuse. The BMW 801 wasn't just an engine. It was a battlefield where the war was fought with wrenches and micrometers, where victory was measured in failed components and saved Allied lives. True power, it turns out, isn't just about horsepower. It's about the choices we make when history demands we take a stand. If you love the BMW 801's incredible story, drop a like and subscribe. What engine should we cover next? The Junkers Jumo 213 or the Pratt & Whitney R2800? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell to catch our next deep dive into the engines that shaped history.